Chapter 21. There was silence. The crickets chirped. Some night bird, high overhead, croaked primevally in the stars. What happened when you got home? It is late. But tomorrow. He lit the lamp again. As he straightened up from adjusting the wick, he stared at me. You are not ashamed to be the guest of a traitor to his country. I don't think you were a traitor to the human race. We moved toward his bedroom windows. The human race is unimportant. It is the self that must not be betrayed. I suppose one could say that Hitler didn't betray his self. He turned. You are right, he did not. But millions of Germans did betray themselves. That was the tragedy. Not that one man had the courage to be evil, but that millions had not the courage to be good. He led the way through to my room and lit the lamp there for me. Good night, But his hand was up, silencing me, and what he must have guessed were to be my thanks. Then he was gone. When I came back from the bedroom, I looked at my watch. It was 1:45. I undressed and turned out the lamp, then stood a moment by the open window. There was a vague smell of drains in the still air, of a cesspool somewhere. I got into bed and lay thinking about Conscience, or losing him, since all my thoughts ended in paradox. If in one way he seemed much more human, more normally fallible, than before, that was trained by what seemed like a lack of virginity in the telling. Calculating frankness is very different from the spontaneous variety. There was some fatal extra dimension in his objectivity, which was much more that of a novelist before a character than of even the oldest, most changed man before his own real past self. It was finally much more like biography than the autobiography it purported to be, patently more concealed lesson than true confession. It was not that I was so self-blind that I saw nothing to be learnt, but how could he presume this on so little knowledge of me? Why should he care? And then there were the footsteps, a whole tangle of unrelated icons and incidents, the photo on the Curiosa cabinet, oblique looks, Allison, the little girl called Lily with her head in sunlight. I was about to go to sleep. At first, hallucinatorily faint, impossible to pinpoint, it began. I thought it must be coming through the walls from a gramophone in Conscience's bedroom. I sat up, put my ear to the wall, listened. And then I leapt out of bed and went to the window. It was creeping down from outside, from somewhere far to the north, well up in the hills, a mile or more away. There was no light, no obvious sound except the crickets in the garden, only so barely perceptible that it fringed the imagined, this faintest drone of men, a lot of men, singing. I thought, fishermen. But why should they be in the hills? Then shepherds. But shepherds are solitaries. It grew a little clearer, as if on a gust of wind, but there was no wind, swelling, then fading away. I thought for an incredible moment that I caught something familiar in the sound, but it couldn't be, and it sank away, almost to complete silence. Then, unimaginable, the strangeness of it, the shock of it, the sound swelled again, and I knew beyond doubt what was being sung up there. It was Tipperary. Whether it was the distance, whether the record, because it must have been a record, had been deliberately slowed. There seemed to be some tonal distortion as well. I couldn't tell. But the song came with a dreamlike slowness and dimness, almost as if it was being sung out of the stars, and it had to cross all that night and space to reach me. I went to the door of my room and opened it. I had some idea that the record player must be in Conscious's room. Somehow, he had had the sound relayed to a speaker or speakers in the hills. Perhaps that was what was in the little room, relaying equipment, a generator. But there was absolute silence in the house. I closed the door and leant back against it. The voices and the song washed dimly down out of the night, through the pine forest, over the house and out to sea. Suddenly the humor, the absurd, tender, touching poetry of the whole thing made me smile. It must be some elaborate joke of Conscious's, mounted for my exclusive benefit, and as a subtle test of my own humor, tact, and intelligence. There was no need to rush about trying to discover how it was done. I should find that out in the morning. Meanwhile, I was to enjoy it. I went back to the window. The voices had become very dim, barely audible, but something else had grown penetratingly strong. It was the cesspool cell I had noticed earlier. Now it was an atrocious stench that infested the windless air, a nauseating compound of decomposing flesh and excrement, so revolting that I had to hold my nose and breathe through my mouth. Below my room, there was a narrow passage between the cottage and the house. I craned down because the source of the smell seemed so close. It was clear to me that the smell was connected with the singing. I remembered that corpse in the shell hole. But I could see nothing anomalous, no movement. The sound faded, went completely. After a few minutes, the smell too was fainter. I stood another 10 or 15 minutes, straining eyes and ears for the faintest stir, but there was none. And there was no sound inside the house, no creeping up the stairs, no doors gently closed, nothing. The crickets chirped, the stars pulsed. The experience was wiped clean. I sniffed at the window. The foul odor still lingered, but under the normal antiseptic smell of the pines and the sea, not over it. Soon it was as if I had imagined everything. I lay awake for at least another hour. Nothing more happened, and no hypotheses made sense. I had entered the domain.